Hello, one and all, and welcome to an episode of Top Deck Thoughts. We are continuing our Zendikar spoiler review. This is the Monday spoilers. We'll cover a couple stuff that got spoiled over the weekend that I would missed and such, but other than that, we're mostly covering Monday spoilers. We're going to start off with actually a pretty saucy aggro card they have, which is Skyclave Shade, 1 and a black for a creature shade. It's a free one. It has kicker of 2 and a black. It can't block, but if it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters. But it also has landfall, and its landfall trigger is the following. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if Skyclave Shade is in your graveyard, and it's your turn, you may cast it from your graveyard this turn. Okay, I do actually like this card a lot. Now, a lot of people are noticing that, yeah, this is Bloodghast Light. It is a fair version of Bloodghast and such. But nevertheless, I do actually like this card, potentially for standard, for a lot of aggro-based deck designs. Most aggro decks really want a good recursive threat. And this is a pretty decent recursive threat. A 2 mana free one that constantly can essentially be cast from the graveyard. And keep in mind that this is a card that the only thing it needs is a landfall trigger. It's not like Escape where you have to get a lot of cards already in your graveyard. If you are constantly playing lands, which in an aggro deck you do want to play to keep up your mana base to get more threats on the battlefield, this is actually a really nifty card. Now, this is going to be one of those cards where it would be more interesting to see how people approach it in aggro decks, whether or not they'll just play as a 2-drop, attack in as they can, then it gets removed, and then whether they would recast it from the graveyard, or are they going to do it in the circumstances where the more likely application is still build up the board presence if they have cards in hand, and then actually play this later game with the kicker cost, which then, being a 2 mana, just 5 free is actually a pretty decent aggro threat. Yeah, I do think this has a chance in aggro-based decks in the meta. In standard. Eternal formats? Probably not. Maybe in some graveyard-based shenanigans like Sir Conrad the Grim and such, where you're constantly trying to get triggers of getting cards out of your graveyard. Stuff like that, essentially. But for itself, I do think this is a really, really good aggro card that we got. And actually, it seems like this Monday we have seen actually a lot of decent aggro cards. We'll talk about that very shortly. Next up, speaking of really good aggro cards, we have... I'm going to use Scryfall's translation here, even though it's a little bit of a jokey translation, but great promo art. It is Kanzandu Large Friend, 1 and 2 green for a creature elephant that has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, this creature gets +2/+2 on a turn, and also has the choice to turn into Kanzandu Vel, which essentially is a tap land. So, as stated before with these modal cards, you have the choice of both just essentially giving this as a tap land, or making this a free creature. Okay, I like this card a lot. I'm going to explain why in a minute. First of all, if we just ignore the modal part of this is a perfectly great free cost aggro creature. Just the fact that it's a free mana free, perfectly fine. But the fact that when any land enters the battlefield, it then becomes a 5/5, that is a lot for free mana. And the fact is that we have ways to put multiple lands in the battlefield in this meta. We have our Cultivates, we have our Migration Paths, we have our Dryads and Souza. This could be a really big threat really, really quick. And that's not even talking about stuff like if you attach Embercleave to this or such. So that's just great on itself. The front side is great. Plus, the opportunity cost is not that much, because the factor is, you could just, if you are not having much plays on turn 1, just play it as a tap land. That's really good. Plus, I do think there's a potential that this might be an all-star in a red-green aggro landfall deck. I'll explain why in a minute, but yeah, I do think this is a very powerful card. It's just great for landfall-based shenanigans. Very powerful. Keep your eye on it. I think it's really, really good. Next up, this card is actually kind of one of my cute favorites of the set. Scoot Swarm, 2 and a green for a creature insect 1/1. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, then create a token that's a copy of this creature instead. Okay, there's just some funny drink applications you can do with this card. I mean, in Commander and EDH with the landfall-based matter deck designs, the fact that if you can at least get a second copy of this on the battlefield, and then when a landfall triggers, then all those landfall triggers happen, which then creates additional copies, you can get, in theory, a pretty wide board state really, really quick. Now, I'm going to say if you are going to approach design around this card, I would recommend more of a gruel base, having stuff like Grum Goalie or even in the mono green with Renata. You want to have ways to get this creatures to have counters on them to help protect them against some of the more powerful board wides that we're going to have in the meta. Because that is going to be the one con of this card. Even though we have stuff like Heroic Intervention to help protect against board wipes, this is a card that can be very prone to it, so you got to keep that in mind. But this is a card that, like stated before with all the landfall-based cards that we have, we are in a meta with a lot of ramp. We have a lot of migration paths. We have the Azuzas, Uros, etc. So you can, theoretically speaking, make a pretty wide board state with this card really quick. Not to mention the fact that even if you don't have the 6 lands already and you're still ramping, you still get inset tokens, so you're still building a wide board state. All you just need is one good trumpet blast, and boop, you are pretty much good and solid. So yeah, if a go wide aggro deck is going to be a thing, I think Scooch Swarm will be a wonderful addition to the deck. Speaking of go wide deck designs, I would feel the remiss if I didn't talk about this card. I was kind of tempted to cut it out because I did think it's more of a limited R-Star, but there is definitely some potential constructed applications for the card, which is Squad Commander. 3 and a white for Core Warrior. When this enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white Core Warrior creature token for each creature in your party. So as stated before, if you have a full party, this will add to the party as well when it enters the battlefield, so keep that in mind. So if you have the other 3 party members, a wizard, a rogue, and a cleric, this would, in theory, will give you 4 Core Warrior Tinker, 4 Core Warrior creature tokens, which that can make a pretty wide board state pretty quick. Plus, it also has the second clause that at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until the end of the turn. Now, as I stated before, I originally thought this was more going to be a powerful limited card. However, as I stated, I think one of the more popular potential good party decks is going to be more in the Azorius variety. And I do think this is actually a pretty good card in, of all things, the Azorius Flyers deck. Which sounds weird at first, but here's the thing. I feel like with the Azorius Flyers, they are going to be the one that will constantly be able to protect their board state and get to the full party requirement, so to speak. So the factor is that this is a 4 mana, create a bunch of extra tokens that if your opponent doesn't have a board state, you can swing in with those extra tokens. But I think mostly, since you're going to fulfill the party requirement, you are going to get that really additional nice boost, which is +1 and gain indestructible until end of turn on all your creatures. And as I stated before, if it's going to be an Azorius Flyer variation of the deck, that's going to be very evasive damage, and that will add up pretty quick. So, I have to admit, Squad Commander, I was originally not going to give much thought on, but I do think if Azorius Flyer Party deck or Azorius Party is going to be a thing, this card is actually going to be a pretty good, pretty much good top-end card, or one of the better top-end cards for the deck design. Especially if it goes into a go-wide board state type of deck. Next up, Ondu Inversion. 6 and 2 white for Sorcery Spell. Destroy all non-land permanents, and this is another modal card, so it does have the choice of entering in as a tapped land. Now this one's interesting. I do feel like this has some pretty good potential for control decks. However, one of the main costs of these modal cards is that they do cost a lot higher than you would usually do. To put in perspective, for this type of board wipe effect, we have stuff like Shadow the Sky in the meta. Yeah, this targets non-land permanents, but even then, usually non-land permanent destruction spells usually cost like around 6 to 7 mana. So the fact that this costs 8 is a pretty costly effect. That being said, still the fact that this has a choice to be in a land at the very least, and if you top deck this is still a unconditional board wipe. That might be very nifty in the proper control decks. That being said, it does have to be a hardcore control deck, like one that has like an alternate win condition type of deck. It really can't be one that has permanence on the battlefield per se, because the fact is that you're going to destroy your own stuff on this. So this is going to be kind of like one of the weird ones where this is going to compete with cards like, say, Ugin, where Ugin is just like an unconditional board wipe plus also the plus doing pew 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 pew, stuff like that. So this is going to be very competitive with that. That being said, still you can never underrate unconditional board wipes, and this one is one of the better unconditional board wipes that still, if you have the land slot and you don't mind playing this a land as a majority of the time, and then later late game, if you're going against a mirror match, you might then play this as a board wipe. I think this is a perfectly great card for standard, but I will admit, I think a majority of the time it's going to be more used as a tap land than really the spell portion, but you're going to be grateful when you have the spell portion when you need it. Next up, this one's pretty short and quick. We actually did get a confirmed reprint for Negate. One in a blue for an instant spell, counter target non-creature spell. A perfect tech card, especially good for sideboards. Even maybe mainboard in some best of one metas. It's great that we got the reprint. Not much to say, just good against some problematic planeswalker cards and just problematic non-creature variety of spells. So, yeah, always keep an eye on this card during your brewing shenanigans. Next up, Nahiri's Binding, 1 and 2 white for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature or planeswalker, enchant permanent can't attack or block, and activated abilities can't be activated. I do love that this is actually a pretty cool story spotlight card, and this is more of a very powerful limited card, just mostly against creatures and the once in a blue moon when you go against a planeswalker. As for standard, it definitely has a chance, though the problem is we do have Banishing Right, we do have Elspeth Conquers Death, so those are probably more better cards than this, but I still want to keep an eye on it because it is an ore, and we do have a card that does discount ores specifically. The 2-drop from Pharaohs that makes your auras discounted by 1. So I could see, like, maybe in an aura style of deck, you might actually want to give this card a shot. Plus, also, it has kind of a cute synergy with the 1-drop Hateful Eidolon, so that if a creature gets destroyed that has an aura on it that you control, you draw a card and such. So, liking that might make this a lot better compared to essentially Banishing Light if you're going with that type of deck design. Nevertheless, though, I think it does have some fringe applications, so keep an eye. But mostly, if this is going to see play, it's mostly based on the fact that it's an aura, so something to keep in mind. Next up, Inscription of Insight. 3 and a blue for a sorcery that has kicker of 2 and 2 blue. Okay. Choose one. If the spell is kicked, choose any number instead. Return up to 2 target creature cards to their owner's hand, or you scry 2 and then draw 2 cards. Or you can target player creates an Etset's blue illusion creature token where Ets is the number of cards in their hand. Eh. The fact that this is not instant does kind of hurt this card a lot, I'm not gonna lie. I do think it's a card to be very considerate of because it is still a kicker spell, and if you do have any way to copy spells per se, then copying this while it's kicked is actually pretty powerful in the right setup. So I think at itself for a control deck, for at least running at least one, maybe two, but mostly one, I am not going to deny the fact that the spell is powerful. Motive spells are spells you should never underestimate. And the fact that you scry 2 and draw 2 cards is probably going to be the most played aspect of this card. Though returning up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hand is actually really good tempo play, so don't deny that. The third choice, I'm not sure, because most control decks will probably at most get a 3/3 or 4/4 out of that. It's just kind of one of those cards where, if it weren't for the fact that we have like Shark Typhoon in the format and such, I mean, granted, you can make the argument that when you cast this spell, then Shark Typhoon becomes a 4/4, and then you choose your effect and such. Granted, I don't know. This is one of those cards where I'm going to have to wait and see. I could definitely see its chance in the meta, but the fact that it doesn't have instant does hurt the spell quite a lot. Next up, let's talk about Maddening Cacophony. 1 in a blue for a sorcery spell at rare. It has kick of 3 in a blue, so you can spend 6 mana with this, and what do? Well, each opponent will mill 8 cards, unless you kick it. Instead, each opponent mills half their library rounded up. So, obviously, this is a 1-card combo with Brewvac in Historic as well as EDH, so keep that in mind. But I do actually like this card potentially for standard because I think this is a really, really good tech card, or not even tech, it's actually just a good engine card for Blue Black Mill deck designs. Blue Black Mill has been trying to be a fiend, and most of them have been mitigating to the rogue style of mill and such. But if you'd want to just go into kind of like Blue Black Control Mill, I do think Maddening Cacophony helps out a lot since it helps fuel your gargoyles. It helps fuel your drowning unlocks. It even fuels that giant Loch Ness monster card that I'm having a brain fart on the name on that can be just a late game threat in general. So I do feel like Maddening Cacophony just in blue black mill is going to be an all star since it's actually a really good mill spell to help fuel a majority of cards that you are wanting to do with that overall deck design. I mean, 8 cards is a lot for a 2 mana spell. And of course, late game, this becomes great because milling half your opponent's library is going to help you with your mill plan really good. So, yeah, Maddening Cacophony, going to see standard play. In my opinion, absolutely, and I'm going to have to get used to probably the obnoxious blue black mill decks on the ladder in best of one. Also, remember that we do have that blue black Garuda companion, so yeah. Next up, we have Skyclave Relic. Free mana for an artifact with Kicker of Free. It's an indestructible mana rock, so you can add 1 mana of any color. However, if it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you can create 2 tap tokens that are copies of Skyclave Relic. I actually legit like this card a lot, to be honest. One, for EDH, this is going to be an all-star card in EDH, just because it's pretty much a Darkstale relic. Darkstale Ingot, I always forget the name of that card, but essentially it's that card, but the factor is that free mana, you can get pretty much that if you need to, but later down the line, then you can just use it to bank in the mana to get more artifacts that are going to be indestructible and can be used as mana locks on your next turn, or that's not even presuming if you have any way to untap them. If you have any way to untap them, then it becomes really silly. So I also see this in potential in Emery of the Lock style deck designs. So yeah, this is a card I'm going to keep my eye on because I do feel like there's some really janky potential you can actually do with this in standard, especially with another powerful, well, 2 powerful artifacts that we got are the Mythic variety, but we'll get to those in about a minute. So overall, I do like Skyclave Relic a lot for EDH, and I do actually think there's some really janky standard-based applications because 6 mana to get essentially a Gilded Lotus, that's 1 extra mana. That's not bad, especially when the Gilded Lotus is technically indestructible. So, now granted, we do have bounce in the format, so you gotta keep that in mind. But besides that, I like this card a lot. Speaking of one of those mythic artifacts, this is probably the cornerstone Jink card of the reveal today. Lithiform Engine. 4 mana for a legendary artifact at Mythic. It has a few activate abilities. 1. For 2 and tapping it, you copy target copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. So remember, activated or triggered abilities could be stuff like cycling. It could also be stuff like planeswalker triggers. It could also be creature activated abilities. So pretty much for 2 mana and tapping this, you can copy any powerful of those abilities. Keep that in mind. You also have tap it for free, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. And its last ability, which is a pretty saucy new one for these type of cards, 4 and tap it, copy target permanent you control. Oh, the janky stuff you can do with this card. Now, obviously, this is going to be an EDH All Star card because this is pretty much a replacement to Strionic Resonator and Brightheart to a basic extent, all in this one nifty little artifact. But there's just some really janky standard applications you can do with this card. And one tip I'm actually going to give for people who are going to brew around this card for standard, don't forget that Zerda, the Dawn Maker, is a card. The fact that this card allows us to make our activate abilities cost 2 less, so with Zerda on the battlefield, this ability becomes 1, this ability becomes 1, and then this can be a 2-cost activated ability. Very, very powerful combo with this card. So keep that in mind since you can play this on turn 3, then play this on turn 4 or something like that, and turn 5. Granted, that's kind of magical Christmas land, but the fact that those combo pretty well, it's either something you would want to play if you're playing Zerda in a Brawl deck, or if you are playing it in a standard deck. Now, one of the more powerful applications, I think, with this card, with the copy target permanent spell you control, I think it's more going to be applied to the aspect that we have powerful control-based enchantments, such as stuff like Banishing Light. We also have powerful creatures in the meta, like, for example, if you can copy, let's say, I can't be a legendary creature, so, we were talking about that elephant before. Let's say you were playing a weird deck that has some landfall-based triggers. The fact that you can play that elephant and then spend 4 mana to get another copy of that elephant, that's actually pretty nice. Or some other powerful creatures. Now, this is a mana sink card. You do have to sink a lot of mana to activate these abilities, presuming you don't have the Zerta combo. But I do feel like there's some really janky shenanigans. We have a lot of powerful instant sorcery spells, we have a lot of powerful permanent spells, and don't underestimate the Strionic Resonant copying a target activator trigger ability. The fact that that can actually be used for a lot. You can use that on, say, your Fable Passage to get more lands. You can use that on some of the powerful planeswalkers that we currently have still that will be in standard. Like, for example, let's say you're playing with the Royal Scions. Let's actually show off the Royal Scions and such, just for clarification for people who don't know the Royal Scions. So, let's get to that real quick. Oh, there we go. So the factor is that all those abilities activated with the Liverform engine is pretty nice. Being able to draw 2 cards and just then discard 2 cards, really nice. Being able to make a creature get +4 and gain first strike and trample, very nice. Oh, and by the way, if you do get to the ultimate, triggering that twice, being able to draw 8 cards, and then doing 2 increments of burn damage to any target, that is ridiculously absurd. So, yeah, I do feel like there is a chance for this to see play in standard. Now, the problem is Elspeth Conquers Death and a lot of exile spells are in the format, as well as going to be Artifact Hate, speaking of which we're going to talk about one shortly. But I do like this. This is going to be my Jank Brew card of the set. I am going to definitely brew around it to do some silly shenanigans. I like this card a lot. I can't wait to brew around it. Next up, we got Molten Blast, 2 and a red for an instant. Choose one. It either deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker, which is nice, or destroy target artifact. Like I said, there is Artifact Hate in the format. Now, this is definitely a downgraded version of a Braid. There's just no denying that. This is definitely a very downgraded version of a Braid. That being said, it's not bad in the sideboard, I would say. The problem is, I think this is more of a sideboard card, unless if artifact-based decks do get prevalent in the meta, then you can debatably mainboard it. But the problem is, even if you do the argument that you can use this as planeswalker removal, we do have Soulseer that's probably a lot more better for that, especially when it deals with both creatures and the planeswalkers. So I'd say keep this in your sideboard, and even then, they're probably better spells if we're being honest. I mean, especially if you're splashing green or playing green, you have Gem Razor and such. But if you're playing like mono red and you do need to find a way to destroy an artifact, here's a choice. Though I do think I'm having a brain fart. The Adventurous spell that gives you the Knight as well as destroy just target artifact might just be a better tech choice, in my opinion. But it's something to keep in mind, at least even for like popper events and such. Maybe it's something to keep in mind. Next up, a really cool Boros commander, Akiri, Fearless Voyager. 1 in Boros for a legendary creature core warrior. It's a free 3, and has whenever you attack a player with 1 or more equipped creatures, you draw a card. And then has an activate ability of white of you may unattach equipment from a creature you control. If you do, tap that creature and it gains indestructible until end of turn. Okay, this is actually really cool. First of all, for EDH, this is going to be a lot of people's new pet EDH deck that they're going to try out. Especially since we do have a lot of popular equipments that got reprinted with the Double Master sets, the swords, Batterskull, even Stoneforge Mystic and such. So I think a lot of people who already picked up their swords and all that stuff are definitely looking at this and being like, okay, that's going to be my new commander. I really want to give it a shot. Because for equipment-based matter decks, this is actually a perfect commander, or even if it's not, it's perfect in the 99 at the very least. For standard, I actually kind of want to brew around this in a Jeskai variation with the Pharos legendary merfolk that gives equipped creatures control flying. I feel like that, along with the Fearless Forager, might actually lead to some really silly shenanigans. And as we've been seeing, we are actually getting a lot of very powerful equipment and such, and we still already have powerful equipment such as Shadow Spear, Embercleave, and such. That's really good. Plus, also, just the activated ability on this card is nothing to underrate. The factor that, yes, unattaching equipment is meh, but being able to essentially protect your creatures, even protect herself, essentially, against like maybe a blocker or maybe a spot removal or such, as long as it's not exile, of course. That's a very, very powerful ability. So, also it's a warrior, so it might actually fit into a party-based deck where maybe it's an equip to party. Oh boy, that's going to be actually one of the jank brews I'll probably do. Equip to party the deck. Nevertheless, I do actually like this card a lot. It's definitely allows you to do some fun equipment-based shenanigans. Plus, also really cool character to read the story with in the lore. If you haven't yet, go catch up with either Amazonian's reading of it or on the MTG website, the story of the Red Root. Really good story of this character, along with her companion. I'm forgetting the name of the merfolk. I just reviewed his card a couple days ago. I'm having a brain fart. Nevertheless, great card. Next up, another powerful mythic artifact from the set, Forsaken Monument. So this is their kind of their motive or honoring of the quote unquote Eldrazi, so to speak. 5 mana for a legendary artifact and mythic. Colorless creatures you control get +2/+2. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless, add an additional colorless mana. And whenever you cast a color spell, you gain 2 life. So, yeah, this is kind of obviously for EDH going to be an all star in your Eldrazi commander decks. No sweat about it. In standard, I'm tempted by this card. I'm not going to lie, since we still do have a lot of powerful artifact creatures in the format. We have stuff like Stonecoil Serpent. We have stuff like, oh, the Manticore that can target planeswalkers with its activated ability. We even have stuff like Palladium Mirror and such. So this card is actually very, very tempting in to make kind of like a artifact style mono, kind of like artifact no color deck kind of spot. The only catch is we don't have that many colorless sources of mana. We do have stuff like Beast's Sanctuary and stuff like the Fountain and stuff. So we do, when you look, you do see that we do have some colorless source of mana. I don't know if not enough to actually make this deck possible. I'm definitely going to keep my eye on it, and might be just one of the janky brews I tried during the early access stream, just out of curiosity with this, just as a homage to the previous horror that was the Eldrazi. Nevertheless, though, fun card. It's definitely going to have some implications for Historic, so keep an eye on this for Historic, is all I'm saying. Next up, cute! But technically, it's the Kagan Jerboa. 2 and a white for a 1/2 mouse, and it has whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So, as I was saying before, if a go wide landfall deck is going to be a thing, this card will actually help out a lot. Just the factor that remember with landfall triggers, we have a lot of ways to put multiple lands on the battlefield with stuff like Cultivate, Migration Path, etc., etc. So if we can get like a Selesnya go wide deck, this could actually be a very scary little mouse. Nevertheless, though, I don't know if it will be like a competitive deck per se. Honestly, I mostly just want to talk about this card because, seriously, that art is so adorable. I like cute cards, and this is a really, really cute card. Now, one other powerful card that actually got revealed over the weekend, Hagra's Mauling. 2 and 2 black for an instant, and then it costs 1 less to cast if an opponent controls no basic land. Destroy target creature, and it's a moto card, so you can play it either as a spell or as a tapped source for black mana. This is not bad. This is actually a really, really good card. Now, for a lot of budget decks, they do like, especially those that play mono black control and such, they do like to play Murder since it's one of the more easily accessible spells. So the factor that you have access to Murder on a potential land, that is nothing to underestimate. Now, granted, there is still a lot of better removal in the format, especially those that target multiple permanents like Planeswalkers and such, which you do have to be very considerate about, especially with how prevalent Planeswalkers are with a very problematic Ugin and stuff, so you got to keep that in mind. Still, I do want to keep an eye on this card because I do think this is one of the better rare modal cards. Like, in tie with the Elephant, just the fact that this is unconditional spot removal on creatures, that if you draw it early game and you need a land drop, you can play it as a land, but then later down the line, yes, it's 4 mana, but let's be honest, for a majority of the time, you are going to cast this for free mana since a lot of people are going to play the non basic lands, such as the double flip cards, the Moto spells lands himself. So this, a majority of the time, unless you're going against someone that's playing a monocolored deck that's not playing the Moto cards, this will be a free mana spell a majority of the time. And if you have to spend a 1 mana for it, you won't mind, especially if it's a problematic creature. So yeah, this card is really, really good. Keep an eye on it. It will probably see a lot. Oh, whoops, that's my Twitter. Whoopsies. But yeah, it will probably see a lot of standard play. Potentially. I feel like if a aggro landfall deck is going to be a fiend, it's actually going to use this as kind of its secret sauce finisher, if I'm being legit honest. Plus, also in EDH, this is actually a pretty powerful card in stuff like Corvold or any deck that has like land-based matter or sacrifice matter deck designs. So yeah, I think this card's actually a lot better than taken at first glance. Plus, we also have that Teferi enchantment in the format where essentially both the mill variation. Actually, this might actually be a pretty decent finisher for the Teferi mill deck if you're going to the Izzet variety. Plus, also there's that Teferi enchantment that costs 4 mana that allows you to, whenever you draw a card, draw twice as many as cards and such. So that's actually a cute interaction. Actually, I gotta keep that in the back of my brain now, mentioning about that. Anyway, I think the card's actually pretty decent for what it is, and I do think if a aggro landfall deck is going to be a thing, this card is going to be the finishing touch to the deck, if I'm being honest. Next up, one of the weirdest one drops that we had in a while, Wayward Guide Beast, a nice homage to Goblin Guide, I will say. 1 red mana for a 2/2 beast with trample and haste. That sounds great. However, when this creature deals combat damage to a player, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Okay, this is a weird card. So, obviously, this is a card that you probably don't want to play on turn 1, which is weird. I will say, though, we do have, at least in the format, a lot of powerful 1-drops already, like Fervent Champion and such, and Shock, that I don't think you really want to play this on turn 1. Obviously, because the fact that returning a land to your hand is very problematic, especially if you're playing aggro. That being said, I do feel like this is another good card yet again in the Gruul slash also landfall aggro style deck designs that you want to keep in mind. Because there is one weird application that I'm going to have to explain this weirdly. This is actually a weird card that actually helps you when you're kind of land screwed. As weird as that sounds. Because the thing is, if you don't draw the land you need, the fact that you can deal damage, bounce a land that you already tapped mana for a specific spell that you played before your post-combat main phase, then you can play that land down, and then being able to use it then just to get excess mana to put either more permanents on the battlefield or such. That's a weird, slim, kind of like, how do I phrase it? Kind of like rare case circumstances where I think the card actually is pretty applicable. There is just also the simple fact that this will help trigger landfall base, and also since we have the Moto base spells that are in the format, actually with the Moto spells, this is something to actually keep in mind, specifically like the ones that you're going to cast a spell later, but also one weird application. This is actually pretty applicable to the Moto double face cards that are like different land types on the essentially different sides. Because let's say, for example, you played this on turn 2, but you don't have any black mana, and you have, like, a Defile you want to cast, but you have the red-black dual land, but it's on the red side. So you can attack in, deal some damage to the opponent, bounce that land, and then play the black side portion of the land, and then be able to cast that Defile and such. So I do feel like this card actually might secretly be a nice tech card for these Moto double face cards if a Moto, kind of like dual aggro deck is going to be a thing. So that's something to actually keep in mind with this card. It's a weird application of the card, but I do think this card is actually a lot better than taken at first glance. Just don't play it ever on turn 1, unless you're playing the block with it, but never on the aggressive. Okay? Okay. Last up, but certainly not least, Sunday Vision. Tune a blue for an instant. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest onto the bottom of your library in a random order, and this is also a modal split card, so you can use it as a tapped blue source of land. So I legit like this card a lot. For control decks, this is a all-star inclusion. Just the fact that you can dig sits deep in your deck at instant speed to get like a counter magic spell or get a flash spell of any sort that is of the instant variety, and just being able to use it to dig for a late game spell This could help with a lot of combo based decks as well as control based decks. And at worst, if you need to, you can play this as a tap land on turn one. Is actually very nice. It's just a card that early game it's very actable as a land source, but in late game can actually be used with the dig ability to help either in control decks to pretty much dig for their control magic or just for combo decks to dig their combo piece. So it's pretty quick and short. This card really, really, really good. It will see a lot of play, in my personal opinion. And that is the Monday spoiler reviews. Now, as you've seen, I'm actually deciding to try to alter the format a little bit, where I'm trying to be a lot quicker with the cards and skip the cards that I think are more limited playable, more or less. Tell me, and like I said, if I miss a card that you want my 2 cents on, just please let me know in the comments down below. Nevertheless, also tell me if you like this format per se, and if there's any way I can improve on it. That would be lovely. Nevertheless, thank you for the time for watching this. I hope you all have a lovely day. This is LevDev, signing out.